Timothy's pulse raced as he stood frozen in the doorway of his penthouse. The sight before him was both surreal and shattering. His little boy curled up on the sofa, tear-streaked cheeks glistening under the dim light. Margaret's gentle arms, cradling him like porcelain. Darren's hiccuped breaths broke the silence, each one tugging at Timothy's chest. Margaret glanced up, her face lined with sympathy. She whispered softly, "She's gone." The words sank into Timothy like ice water. He wanted to demand answers, to shout, but the sight of Darren clinging desperately to Margaret's sleeve silenced him. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice low. "When? Just minutes ago. She left the boy. And the suitcases." Margaret's eyes flicked toward the neatly stacked luggage by the door. Timothy's stomach twisted. Patricia had actually done it. Walked out. He staggered to the sofa and crouched down, brushing a damp curl from Darren's forehead. His son didn't even flinch. That small distance, that unfamiliarity, hit harder than any corporate blow Timothy had ever faced. His own child didn't know him. Not truly. Their conversations had always been filtered through screens, their bond limited to bedtime stories over video calls. Patricia had always controlled the narrative, always found excuses. Forcing himself to stand, Timothy snatched his phone from his pocket and dialed Patricia. The ring dragged on until she finally answered. "Patricia, what the hell is going on?" Her voice was cool, detached. "I need time for myself, Timothy. You can take him for a while." "A while," he repeated, incredulous. "You can't just abandon your child." But the line clicked dead before he could finish. Timothy lowered the phone slowly, his knuckles white. The silence roared in his ears. He paced the penthouse, raking a hand through his hair. "What am I supposed to do now? I don't even know where to start. His voice broke. "I've never been alone with him for more than a weekend." Margaret stood, adjusting Darren in her arms. "Sir, I wish I could stay, but my father is ill, and I must go after work. Darren will need you tonight." Timothy stopped, guilt and panic clashing inside him. "I have the fundraiser," he muttered. The event was critical. Donors, board members, press. His entire company's next expansion rested on his presence. But now his son needed him in a way he had never allowed himself to imagine. He looked at the boy, sleeping fitfully, thumb half tucked against his cheek. For the first time, the mighty Timothy Banks felt powerless. He could command empires, sway investors, and build skyscrapers, yet he had no blueprint for this moment. Margaret gently placed Darren back on the sofa, covering him with a blanket. She touched Timothy's arm. "You'll figure it out. He's not expecting perfection, just a father." When she left, the silence pressed down heavier than before. Timothy stood in the middle of the vast penthouse, torn between duty to the empire he'd built and the tiny boy who had suddenly, unexpectedly, become his whole world. Timothy's nerves were already frayed when Gail brushed him off. Her dismissive laugh over the phone still echoed in his ears as he wrestled Darren into his little suit. He had imagined the night differently, him and Gail arriving polished and poised, mingling with donors like a power couple. Instead, it was just him and a 4-year-old boy who looked at him like a stranger. "Hold still, buddy," Timothy muttered as he knelt to button Darren's jacket. Darren fidgeted, his lip wobbling. Timothy forced a smile. "You look sharp, just like your old man." Darren gave a small shrug, not meeting his eyes. The weight of that silence nearly crushed him, but Timothy swallowed the ache. Tonight, he had to balance both worlds, the fundraiser and his son. At the event, the ballroom glimmered with crystal chandeliers and hushed conversations over champagne flutes. Timothy clasped Darren's small hand tightly, weaving through clusters of investors and dignitaries. Heads turned, some curious, others surprised. Timothy Banks never brought family. He was all business, all empire. He tried to introduce Darren, crouching low. "This is my son," he said proudly, though the pride warred with uncertainty. Darren offered a timid wave before shrinking behind Timothy's leg. The adult smiled politely before shifting the conversation back to stock trends and development projects. Timothy kept one hand on Darren's shoulder, but as he shook hands and signed checks, his grip loosened. A momentary distraction, a laugh at some witty remark, and when he turned back, Darren was gone. Darren? His voice sharpened, slicing through the clinking of glasses. He scanned the room, heart thundering. Darren! Across the hall, down a quieter corridor, Dakota Littles. Heels clicked softly against marble. She had slipped away from the noise to take a phone call when she heard the faintest sound, a small, broken sob echoing from near the stairwell. She followed instinct, and there he was, a little boy, curled in on himself, tears streaming down, blushed cheeks. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently, crouching to his level. "What's wrong?" Darren's hiccuped words tumbled out. "I lost my dad. He was talking to someone and then he was gone. He left me." Dakota's heart squeezed. She smoothed a hand over his hair. "It's okay. I can help you find him. Sometimes grown-ups get distracted, like when you're watching your favorite cartoon and your mom or dad calls, and you don't hear them right away." Darren sniffled, blinking up at her. "Yeah," he nodded. "Sweetie, it's the same thing. Your dad didn't mean to. Let's go find him together." She offered her hand. Darren hesitated, then slipped his small fingers into hers. As they rounded the corner back into the main hall, Timothy's frantic voice boomed, "Darren!" He spotted his son, relief crashing over him like a wave. He dropped to his knees and pulled Darren close. "I'm so sorry. I can't believe I let you out of my sight." He kissed the boy's hair, holding him tight. "Never again, buddy, never." When Timothy finally looked up to thank the woman who had found his son, his breath caught. "Dakota?" She smiled, recognition sparking. "Hi, Timothy. You're all grown up and with a son, no less." For a moment, time slipped backward. College days flooded him. Nights of laughter, shared ambitions, quiet conversations about dreams. She had been one of the few who saw past his sharp edges. "Yes," he said, rising slowly, Darren clinging to his leg. "This is Darren." Dakota crouched again, smiling warmly at the boy. "You've got your dad's eyes." Darren peeked at her shyly, but something about her calm presence eased him. Timothy cleared his throat, straightening his tie. I could use some help. This is all new to me. His mother dropped him off a few hours ago, and..." His words faltered, rare vulnerability slipping through. Dakota's gaze softened. "That's a lot to handle, Timothy." "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted, his voice low enough only she could hear. "I can't even keep track of him for 10 minutes. "Don't be so hard on yourself," she said gently. "Parenting isn't about perfection. It's about showing up." Darren tugged Timothy's sleeve. "Daddy, can she stay with us?" The simple question cracked something inside him. Darren had never asked for anyone. Timothy looked at Dakota, who was watching Darren with quiet affection. I don't want to impose," Timothy said carefully. Dakota straightened, her smile wry. "You're not imposing. Maybe I can help you both tonight. You handle the speeches and handshakes, and I'll make sure Darren doesn't get lost in the crowd." For the first time that evening, Timothy felt the tight knot in his chest loosen. He exhaled slowly, almost smiling. "Thank you, Dakota. Really." She brushed it off with a wave, but the way her eyes lingered on him told a different story. Let's just say, old friends should look out for each other. As they walked back into the ballroom together, Timothy with Darren's hand in one of his, and Dakota walking on the other side, people turned again. This time, though, Timothy didn't care about appearances. For once, he wasn't the mogul, commanding the room. He was a father, fumbling but trying. Timothy had the penthouse dining room set with more care than usual. fresh flowers in a vase, sunlight spilling through the tall windows, and a simple spread of sandwiches, fruit, and iced tea. He kept pacing until the intercom buzzed, announcing Dakota's arrival. The moment she stepped inside, Darren bolted from the sofa and ran straight into her arms. "Dakota!" he shouted, wrapping himself around her waist. Timothy froze mid-step. "Wow," he murmured almost to himself. "He doesn't do that with me, or even his mom." Dakota smoothed Darren's hair, glancing up at Timothy with a soft smile. "That's because he recognizes I'm very comfortable with children." Timothy tilted his head, curiosity sharpening his features. "You have children yourself?" "No," she laughed lightly. "I work with them. I run programs at the youth center. Kids can always tell when someone's really present with them." Timothy leaned back against the table, arms crossed. "Well then, great. Please teach me your magic." Her laughter filled the room, warm and unguarded. "It's not magic, Timothy. The key is being honest and not perfect. Kids don't need you to have all the answers. They just need to know you're really there, even when you mess up." He rubbed the back of his neck, exhaling a low sigh. "This is going to be difficult for me. I'm used to, well, being perfect, at least in business." "That's the thing," Dakota said gently, setting Darren on a chair beside her. "Business, deals, and children aren't the same. You can't negotiate with a 4-year-old. You just have to be human." Timothy chuckled despite himself. "Human. That might be my weakest skill." Darren giggled at the remark, his small hands all ready, reaching for the fruit. Dakota caught Timothy's eye and grinned. "See, he already thinks you're funny. That's a start." They ate together, the atmosphere surprisingly light. Timothy found himself watching not just Darren's easy laughter, but the way Dakota guided him, patient, calm, never condescending. It stirred something inside him, a mix of admiration and longing. As the meal wound down, Timothy leaned forward, his voice lower. "You know, seeing you again after all these years, it feels like fate dropped you in at exactly the moment I needed someone." Dakota's smile softened, her eyes searching his. "Or maybe it's just reminding you that you don't have to figure this out alone." After lunch, Darren darted toward his toys in the corner of the living room, pulling out cars, blocks, and a ragged stuffed dinosaur. Timothy rose, ready to retreat back into his comfort zone, emails, calls, anything that felt like control, but Dakota stopped him with a raised brow. "You said you wanted me to teach you," she said, her tone playful but firm. "Parenting isn't something you outsource. It starts right here, with him." Timothy hesitated, glancing toward Darren, who was already stacking blocks unevenly, his tongue poking out in concentration. "What do I even do?" he asked, his voice lower, almost embarrassed. "Start by joining him," Dakota said simply. Timothy exhaled, unbuttoned his jacket, and crouched beside his son. "Hey, champ, what you building?" "A castle," Darren mumbled without looking up. His small hands pressed one block onto another, but the stack wobbled dangerously. Timothy reached, out instinctively. "Here, let me—" Dakota touched his wrist, stopping him. "Don't fix it for him. Ask if he wants help." Timothy blinked. "Right. Do you want me to help?" Darren looked at him, big eyes wary, then nodded. "Okay." They worked. Together, Timothy's larger hands steadying the base while Darren added pieces. It wasn't perfect. 2 towers leaned awkwardly, and the gate collapsed twice. But Darren giggled at the mess, and Timothy found himself laughing too. A strange warmth filled his chest, unfamiliar yet grounding. When the castle finally stood upright, Darren clapped. "We did it!" Timothy grinned, pride swelling. "Yeah, we did." He glanced at Dakota, who smiled knowingly. "See?" she said. "It's not about the castle. It's about him knowing you're there, building with him instead of for him." Later, Darren grew restless and began tossing toy cars across the floor. One smacked against the leg of a chair. Timothy shot up. "Darren, don't do that, you'll break something." The boy's face crumpled, his lip trembling. Dakota crouched beside Timothy before he could say more. "Try this," she whispered. "Get on his level, calm, not commanding." Timothy knelt, meeting Darren's teary eyes. His voice softened. "Hey, buddy, I get that you're excited, but throwing toys could hurt someone or break them. How about we race the cars instead?" Darren sniffled, then pushed a car into Timothy's. "And race." Timothy exhaled in relief as they set up on the rug. Darren squealed with laughter as his little car won every round, and Timothy didn't even care that he lost every race. When Darren finally collapsed against his side, yawning, Timothy looked at Dakota. "That was exhausting," he admitted, brushing hair from his damp forehead. "But it felt good." "That's parenting," Dakota said, her eyes warm. "Messy, tiring, and sometimes frustrating, but worth it." As Darren drifted to sleep curled against his father, Timothy sat still, holding him carefully, as though afraid he might disappear. His chest felt tight, but not from panic this time, from something far deeper. He looked up at Dakota, voice quiet. "Thank you. I don't think I could have done this without you." "You don't have to," she said, her gaze lingering on him. "That's the whole point." The penthouse was unusually quiet after Darren finally drifted into sleep, tucked into the large guest room with his stuffed dinosaur cradled under one arm. Timothy lingered at the doorway for a while, watching his son's steady breaths, before joining Dakota in the living room. The soft city light spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a glow over her face as she sat curled comfortably on the sofa. Dakota tilted her head. "He's precious. Is Patricia his mother?" Timothy's shoulders stiffened, and for a long moment he just stared at the glittering skyline. Finally, he exhaled, heavy and slow. "Yes. Patricia's his mom. We got married shortly after graduation. It wasn't out of love. It was what our parents expected. 2 powerful families, 2 ambitious kids. Everyone thought it made sense." He paused, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "We dated for 2 years, and somehow we still didn't know each other. The marriage lasted 18 months. She moved out when Darren was just 2 months old." His voice cracked a little, though. He fought to keep it steady. "After that, I only got weekends when she allowed it. Sometimes she canceled last minute. Sometimes she didn't pick up the phone at all. I'm a stranger to him, Dakota. My own son looks at me like he's not sure who I am." Dakota's gaze softened, her hands folded in her lap. "She didn't interrupt." Timothy swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "Then yesterday, no warning, no explanation. She just dropped him here with his suitcases and left. When I got home, he was crying so hard, Margaret had to rock him to sleep. Seeing him like that, confused, scared, broken, it tore me apart. I didn't even know how to hold him." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't heavy. Dakota leaned forward slightly. "Well, you both were young, and being a parent, it isn't easy, even under the best circumstances. But what I do see is this: you love him. That's what matters. The rest? You'll figure it out together." Timothy looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time that day, the guilt eased. Her words didn't feel like pity, they felt like truth. He gave her a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Dakota, I needed to hear that." She smiled. "Back." "Of course." He shifted on the sofa, running a hand through his hair. "Now enough about me. Tell me about the youth center. You mentioned you work with kids. What's that like?" Her eyes lit up immediately, and Timothy noticed the way her whole posture changed, animated and alive. "It's the most fulfilling thing I've ever done. We run after-school programs, tutoring, sports leagues, art classes. Some of these kids don't have safe places to go when the school day ends. The center becomes that safe place." Timothy leaned in, intrigued. "And you handle all of it?" Not alone, Dakota laughed softly. We've got volunteers, teachers, community leaders. My job is making sure it all runs smoothly and making sure every child knows they matter. Some come from broken homes, some from poverty, some just need someone to listen. Her expression softened. I guess I've always believed no child should feel invisible. Timothy felt a pang in his chest at that. Invisible, that was exactly how Darren had looked earlier. For the first time, he saw a bridge between his world and hers. Maybe she could help him learn how to give Darren what he'd been missing all along. Dakota, he said quietly, I think you might be exactly what my son, and maybe I, need right now. She didn't reply right away, only held his gaze with a look that carried both warmth and caution. But there was no denying the spark of something familiar and new between them. The youth center buzzed with energy as Timothy walked in, Darren's small hand clutched in his. Bright murals covered the walls, laughter echoed from every corner, and the smell of paint and crayons lingered in the air. Darren's eyes lit up instantly when Dakota led them to the paint room, where easels lined the walls and jars of colorful brushes waited. Within minutes, Darren was surrounded by kids his age, dipping brushes into bold splashes of blue and green. He giggled as streaks of color splattered across his paper, his little tongue poking out in concentration. Timothy lingered at the doorway, one hand in his pocket, watching with a mix of awe and relief. For the first time, he was seeing his son. Fully at ease, Dakota appeared at his side, holding out a juice box with a teasing smile. Observation fuel, she said. Timothy chuckled, accepting it. His gaze never left Darren. He's a little artist, he said, his voice softer than he intended. Dakota leaned against the wall, watching Darren too. He's expressing himself. Kids often say things through color and shape long before they have the words. The important part is that you notice, that you watch. Timothy nodded, taking a slow sip from the juice box, as pride warmed his chest. Maybe he hadn't completely missed his chance to know his son. Later, they all piled into a booth at a local pizzeria, Darren bouncing with excitement as a huge cheese pizza was set down in front of them. Grease and laughter filled the table, as Darren told exaggerated stories about his painting, complete with wild hand gestures. Afterward, they wandered into the arcade next door. Darren shrieked with delight as he dragged his father from one flashing game to the next. Timothy laughed, harder than he had in years, chasing neon tickets across the sticky carpet. That night, back at the penthouse, Darren's eyelids drooped as he crawled into bed. He tugged Timothy's sleeve. Thanks, Dad. I had a great time. And Dakota, she's super great. Timothy's throat tightened as he tucked the blanket around him. Yeah, she is, he whispered. He sat at the edge of the bed, opening a storybook. Darren curled close, eyes heavy but attentive, as Timothy read until his voice grew low and the boy drifted into sleep. For the first time, Darren's hand rested against his father's, holding on even in dreams. Timothy quickly realized that working from home with a 4-year-old was no small feat. At first, Darren darted through the penthouse like a whirlwind, interrupting calls, tugging at his sleeve during video conferences, and scattering crayons across the polished conference table. Timothy tried to balance spreadsheets and investor pitches while Darren tugged at his patience. But slowly, he began to set boundaries, something he'd never had to think about before. One corner of the penthouse became Darren's art zone, splattered with paints and paper. Another corner became the play zone, filled with blocks and toy cars. Timothy marked off clear hours for work, then made a promise. When the clock struck 6, it was family time. No phone, no laptop, just them. Of course, it wasn't always smooth. Darren was vocal about what he liked and didn't like. If he didn't want broccoli, he made sure Timothy knew. If Timothy tried to work late, Darren stormed into the office. with crossed arms and loud protests. There were arguments, sometimes shouting, both of them learning where the other's limits lay. Timothy had never imagined himself raising his voice to his son, and each time it happened, guilt gnawed at him. But at the end of the day, no matter how hard the hours had been, Timothy knelt beside Darren's bed, kissed his forehead, and whispered the same promise. "I love you, son. We'll figure it out together." And Darren, sleepy-eyed and stubborn, would mumble back, "Okay, Dad." The one constant through it all was Dakota. Timothy found himself calling her daily, sometimes under the guise of asking for parenting tips, sometimes just to hear her steady voice. She became his anchor, reminding him that mistakes didn't make him a bad father, just a learning one. Her laughter eased his tension, and her gentle advice guided him through the rough edges. "You're doing better than you think," more she told him one evening over the phone, her voice soft through the speaker. Timothy leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pulling at his bones, but a smile tugging at his lips. "I don't think I could do this without you, Dakota." "You could," she replied simply, "but I'm glad you don't have to." And for the first time in years, Timothy began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could build more than just empires. He could build a family. Movie night had been Darren's idea, and Timothy hadn't had the heart to say no. The three of them curled up on the oversized sectional sofa, the city skyline glittering behind them, a bowl of popcorn balanced between Timothy and Darren. It was almost too perfect, too normal for Timothy, who wasn't used to quiet evenings like this. Halfway through the movie, Darren squirmed closer to Dakota and asked, with all the bluntness of a child, "Dakota, are you my dad's girlfriend?" Dakota's laugh rang out before she could stop herself, caught completely off guard. "No, sweetheart, we're good friends from school." "Then why not?" Darren pressed, his little brow furrowed. "Dad looks at you funny, like those people on TV when they like each other." Timothy inhaled a mouthful of popcorn at the worst possible moment, choking as his face turned red. "Darren, I think you've said enough," he croaked, pounding his chest. "The movie is going." Dakota tried and failed to smother her laughter, her eyes twinkling as Darren leaned back against her, completely content. By the time the credits rolled, Darren was rubbing his eyes, fighting sleep. He surprised Timothy again when he whispered, "Dakota, can you put me to bed?" Timothy watched as his son slipped his hand into hers, trusting her without hesitation. It stung a little, but also filled him with a strange kind of relief. Darren was finding comfort. When Dakota returned, she found Timothy nursing a glass of water, his posture stiff. She sat across from him, her expression gentle but firm. "Are we going to talk about what Darren said?" Timothy rubbed the back of his neck, staring at the floor. "He's right," he admitted, voice low. "But I don't trust my feelings. I was into you in college. I just never said a word because of Patricia and because my family had their own expectations for me." He paused, meeting her eyes finally. "What if I'm just reliving those old feelings? What if they're not real?" Dakota's lips curved into a faint smile, her tone thoughtful. "Maybe you are reliving them, but that doesn't make them less real. And look, whatever choices you regret, you got Darren out of the deal." That earned a laugh from Timothy, soft and genuine. "Yeah," he admitted, a smile tugging at his lips. "That was pretty great." The music from the outdoor concert still pulsed in Timothy's chest long after the final notes had faded. The crowd was alive with cheers, neon lights flickered across the night sky, and Darren, perched high on his father's shoulders, waved his arms with pure delight. For once, Timothy wasn't thinking about work or deadlines. He was thinking about the weight of his son against him, the sound of Darren's laughter, and the warmth of Dakota walking beside them. When the crowd began to surge toward the exits, Timothy instinctively reached for Dakota's hand. At first it was a practical move, guiding her through the sea of people. But as they weaved through the throng, he realized He hadn't let go, and she hadn't pulled away. Their fingers stayed entwined until they finally spilled into the quieter edges of the parking lot. By the time they reached the car, Timothy set Darren gently into the back seat, where the boy's excitement had already shifted into drowsy yawns. Closing the door softly, Timothy, without hesitation, reached for her hand again. He didn't let go. Not even as he started the car, his hand resting on the console so their fingers could remain linked. Silence filled the drive, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick with unspoken words, the hum of possibilities hanging between them. Timothy glanced at her once, twice, his chest tightening with the realization that this felt right, natural, almost inevitable. When he pulled up in front of her apartment, he reluctantly released her hand. Dakota unbuckled, turning to him with a small smile. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, then leaned in and kissed him softly on the cheek. It was quick, but it lingered in his mind like an echo. "Good night, Timothy," she whispered, her voice low but warm. She slipped out of the car and walked toward her door without looking back, though he thought he saw the curve of a smile before she disappeared inside. Timothy sat there for a moment, his cheeks still tingling from her kiss. He looked into the rearview mirror at Darren, fast asleep with his mouth slightly open, and felt something shift inside him. For the first time in a long while, his life wasn't just about responsibility, it was about hope. The smell of sizzling bacon filled the penthouse the next morning as Timothy stood over the stove, carefully flipping eggs. Darren's laughter rang through the air, his toy airplane swooping and diving in wild circles around the kitchen. "Buddy," Timothy warned gently, "no running in here, you'll get hurt." But Darren, lost in his imaginary flight path, darted around the island one last time, only to collide headfirst into the sharp corner of the kitchen table. The sound of the thud was followed by a piercing scream. Timothy's heart stopped. He dropped the spatula and rushed over, scooping Darren into his arms. A swelling knot was already forming on the boy's forehead, angry and red. "Oh, God," Timothy muttered, his voice shaking. "It's okay, son, I've got you, you're okay." But inside, panic surged. Within minutes, he was in the car, Darren crying against his chest as he sped toward the hospital. His hands trembled as he fumbled with his phone to call Dakota. "It's Darren," he blurted, his voice raw. "He hit his head. I'm taking him to the ER." "I'm on my way," Dakota said without hesitation. By the time she arrived, Timothy and Darren were already in the back. She found him pacing the sterile hallway, his shirt wrinkled, his face pale with worry. When the doctor finally emerged with a reassuring smile, Timothy nearly collapsed with relief. "It's just a bump. No concussion. Nothing serious. He'll be sore, but he's fine." Back home, Darren was tucked on the couch with an ice pack, and his stuffed dinosaur already dozing off. Timothy stood nearby, his hands gripping the back of a chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. When Dakota reached for him, the dam broke. "I froze," he confessed, his voice cracking. "I didn't know what to do. He was screaming, and I thought, what if I lose him? What if I fail him again?" His chest heaved as years of buried fear and guilt spilled out. Dakota wrapped her arms around him, holding him firmly against her. "This is what kids do, Timothy. They run, they fall, they scare you half to death. And this," she pressed, a hand against his back, "this is what parents do. You pick them up, you take care of them, and you keep going." Her steadiness anchored him. Slowly, he lifted his head, his eyes locking onto hers. Emotion welled up. Gratitude mingled with something deeper. He leaned in and kissed her, tentative but real. "Thanks for being here," he whispered. Dakota smiled softly, her hand brushing his cheek. "No problem," but the look in her eyes told him it was more than that. It was the beginning of something neither of them could deny. The next few days passed in a fragile kind of peace. Darren's knot had gone down, and Timothy kept him close, still shaken by how helpless he had felt in the hospital. Dakota stopped by every evening, helping with dinner, reading stories, and offering Timothy the quiet assurance that he wasn't alone in this. Their kiss after the scare lingered in his mind, a reminder of something he had long buried but could no longer ignore. But the calm didn't last. One evening, the sound of the penthouse door buzzer jolted Timothy from the couch. Darren was sprawled, across his lap coloring a picture, while Dakota sat nearby flipping through the day's mail. Timothy frowned at the intercom, not expecting anyone. "Mr. Banks?" The doorman's voice crackled through. "It's Mrs. Patricia Banks. She says it's urgent. She's on her way up." Timothy's stomach dropped. Before he could respond, Patricia swept into the penthouse, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Her eyes were storm clouds, her jaw tight. In one hand, she clutched a crumpled envelope, the other wrapped around her phone. "Really, Timothy?" she snapped the moment she saw him. "This is how you repay me? With custody papers?" She shook the envelope like a weapon. Darren froze, his crayon slipping from his fingers. He scrambled off the couch, uncertain, but Dakota was already at his side, gently guiding him toward his room. Patricia's eyes followed the movement, narrowing as she registered Dakota's presence. "And her," Patricia hissed. "Of course. I should have known. Your little college crush. What is she doing here, playing house while you plot to take my son away from me?" Timothy stood, his expression hardening. "Watch your tone, Patricia. Darren can hear you." Patricia ignored him, her gaze burning holes through Dakota. "Don't you dare stand there smiling like some savior. You think you can walk in after all these years, hold his hand a few times and replace me?" Dakota straightened, her voice calm but firm. "No one could replace you, Patricia. I'm just here for Darren, and for Timothy when he needs support." "That's all? Support?" Patricia barked a laugh, sharp and bitter. "Is that what you call sneaking around with a man who's still legally tied to me by a custody agreement? Don't think I don't see what's happening here. You're not just helping. You're trying to take what's mine." Timothy's patience snapped. "Patricia, enough." His voice cut through the tension like steel. "Dakota has done more for Darren in the last 2 weeks than you've done in months. She didn't abandon him with no warning. She didn't hang up the phone when he cried for you. She showed up. That's what matters." Patricia's face flushed crimson, her chest rising and falling. "You think a judge is going to side with you after a hospital calls me about my son's injury? Do you know what that looked like? Do you have any idea the case you've just handed me?" Timothy took a step closer, his voice low but unwavering. "I took him to the hospital the second he got hurt. I didn't ignore it, didn't minimize it. I panicked because I care. That's what parents do, and the court will see that. They'll see the truth." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Patricia's eyes darted between Timothy and Dakota, her fury mixing with something more fragile, fear. She wasn't used to Timothy standing his ground. Finally, she shoved the envelope back into her bag. "You'll regret this," she spat, before turning on her heel and storming out, the door slamming behind her. The echo lingered long after she was gone. Timothy rubbed a hand across his face, exhaustion pulling at his features. Dakota stepped closer, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. "She's scared," Dakota said softly. "That's why she lashed out. But you handled it." Timothy looked at her, gratitude etched into every line of his face. "I don't know what I'd do if you weren't here." Dakota's smile was gentle, but her eyes held something stronger, conviction. "You'd figure it out." Timothy exhaled. Slowly, the weight of the confrontation easing just enough for him to see what mattered. Darren was safe. Dakota was by his side. The courtroom was tense, every word echoing against the polished wood walls, as Patricia's attorney painted Timothy as an absent father, a man too wrapped up in business to care for a child. Timothy sat, rigid at the defense table, jaw clenched, listening to accusations that didn't fit the man he was trying so desperately to become. Dakota sat quietly in the back row, her presence a silent reminder that he wasn't fighting this battle alone. When Timothy's attorney finally stood, the tone shifted. Exhibits were shown. Receipts of Darren's medical visits, photos of Darren at the youth center, and testimony from Margaret, the housekeeper, who spoke of Patricia's long absences and indifference to her son's needs. Still, Timothy knew it wouldn't matter until Darren himself was heard. Judge Lopez, a stern but kind-eyed woman, leaned forward. "I'd like to speak with the child privately." Darren was brought into chambers, small in his suit, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "For courage." Judge Lopez knelt so she was eye-level with him. "Darren, can you tell me how life is with your father?" Darren fiddled with the dinosaur's tail, then spoke softly but clearly. "He spends time with me. We go places. He takes me to the center for fun stuff. He reads to me at night and makes breakfast fun, like smiley pancakes." His eyes lit up at the memory. "And what about your mother?" Judge Lopez asked gently. Darren's gaze dropped. "Mom be busy with her friends. I have a nanny in the day, and when Mom goes out sometimes Theo watches me." The judge frowned. "Who is Theo?" "The doorman," Darren said innocently. "Mom tells him to come up every hour and check to make sure I'm still sleeping or not crying." Judge Lopez's jaw tightened. "Where does she go when Theo is watching you?" "I don't know," Darren shrugged. "But she always in fancy clothes." The judge sat back, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Darren. One more question. Who do you prefer to live with?" Darren looked scared, his little hands twisting the dinosaur's arm. Judge Lopez softened her tone. "Son, it's okay. You can tell me the truth." After a moment, Darren whispered, "My dad. He never leaves me alone." Judge Lopez nodded slowly. "Thank you, Darren. You've been very helpful and very brave." When Darren was escorted back to the waiting room, Judge Lopez returned to the bench, her expression steely. She turned first to Patricia, whose painted smile was beginning to crack. "Mrs. Banks," Judge Lopez began, her voice firm, "I am appalled. Leaving your 4-year-old son in the care of a doorman while you indulge in nightlife is not only irresponsible, it is dangerous. Consider this your only warning. If I hear of this happening again, I will have you arrested for child endangerment." Gasps rippled through the courtroom, but Judge Lopez wasn't finished. "Mr. Banks," she continued, "I see a father who, though late to this role, has embraced it with sincerity. Your son describes a home where he feels seen, cared for, and safe. That is what matters most in this court." Patricia's attorney leapt up, protesting. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "Enough!" Judge Lopez snapped. "The welfare of the child is my only concern." She struck her gavel sharply. "Effective immediately, I am awarding full custody of Darren to Mr. Banks. Mrs. Banks, you will have supervised visitation for the next 6 months, at which time the court will review your progress." Patricia shot to her feet, outrage flashing across her face. "You can't do this. Darren is my son." Judge Lopez's gaze was unyielding. "And as his mother, you should have remembered that before leaving him alone with a stranger. Court is adjourned." The gavel fell. Timothy sat, stunned, relief and disbelief colliding inside him. Darren was his, officially wholly his. He glanced back at Dakota, whose proud, tearful smile steadied him. When Patricia stormed out, heels echoing like gunshots, Timothy rose and finally exhaled the breath he'd been holding for weeks. Outside the courtroom, Darren ran straight into his arms. "We can stay together now, right, Dad?" Timothy hugged him tight, his throat thick with emotion. "Yes, son, we're together. Always." The weeks after the custody ruling felt like the first breath of fresh air Timothy had taken in years. The tension that once hung over the penthouse was replaced by a sense of routine. Messy, imperfect, but theirs. Darren's laughter filled The rooms at all hours, echoing through spaces that had once been cold and silent. Mornings became sacred. Timothy and Darren stood side by side at the kitchen island, flipping pancakes into shapes that hardly resembled dinosaurs, but made Darren squeal with delight. Dakota often joined them, slipping into their lives so naturally it felt like she had always been there. She'd tie an apron around her waist, tease Timothy for burning the bacon, and let Darren help with the fruit bowls, until more strawberries ended up in his mouth than on the plate. Afternoons were for adventures. Some days it was the youth, a center, where Darren proudly showed off his newest paintings. Other days it was trips to the park, Darren racing ahead with his toy airplane while Timothy and Dakota strolled behind, their conversation easy and warm. Timothy had once lived for the boardroom, but now he found himself living for these moments, small, fleeting, but real. Meanwhile, Patricia all but vanished. Word spread through mutual acquaintances that she had gone to Europe to find herself. Paris, Milan, Barcelona. Social media posts showed her draped in designer clothes, wine glass in hand, smiling as though her son's absence barely touched her. Timothy stopped checking after a while. He had no energy left for her chaos. One evening, a few weeks later, as Darren snored softly in the next room, Timothy turned to Dakota and said almost in awe, "I don't think I've ever felt this close to anyone, not even Patricia. You've helped me build something I didn't think I was capable of." Dakota smiled, her eyes warm. "You were capable all along, Timothy. You just needed to believe it, and for once he did." Timothy had never been a man who stumbled over words. Boardrooms bowed to his confidence, negotiations bent to his authority. Yet the night he and Dakota sat down with Darren, his palms were damp. They perched together on the sofa, Darren wedged between them with his dinosaur tucked under his arm, wide-eyed as if sensing something big was coming. "Buddy," Timothy began carefully, "there's something we want to talk to you about." He glanced at Dakota, who gave him a reassuring nod. "You know how much Dad cares about Dakota, right?" Darren grinned instantly. "Yeah, you always look at her funny." Timothy flushed and Dakota laughed softly, brushing Darren's hair back. "Well, we were wondering how you'd feel if we started dating, like how people on TV go out to dinner and hold hands, but also spend time together as a family." Darren tilted his head, thoughtful. "So, she'd be your girlfriend?" "Yes," Timothy said, his voice low but steady. "But more importantly, she'd still be your friend. Nothing changes between you two unless you want it to." Darren considered for a moment before shrugging with a grin. "That's fine. She already tucks me in better than you." Timothy laughed, relief pouring through him as Dakota pressed a kiss to Darren's cheek. "So, you're on board with this idea?" she asked. "Totally," Darren declared, already turning back to his drawing. "Can we get pizza tonight to celebrate?" And just like that, their path was set. The next 18 months unfolded in a rhythm that felt natural and new. Timothy and Dakota balanced their lives around Darren's needs, their relationship never competing with his place at the center of it all. They built memories together, trips to the zoo, Saturday morning pancake traditions, family movie nights that ended with all three asleep on the couch. Timothy discovered a softer version of himself, one that thrived on bedtime stories and silly games, not just stock reports and business dinners. And Dakota, once hesitant, found herself deeply rooted in the family they were creating. She wasn't just helping anymore, she belonged. By the time a year and a half had passed, Darren was sure about his relationship with Dakota. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through the park, Timothy realized he didn't just want her in his life, he needed her in every chapter still to come. He planned the proposal with Darren's enthusiastic help. The boy insisted on hiding the ring box inside a toy dinosaur, declaring it their secret mission. On a warm evening, surrounded by fairy lights on the balcony of the penthouse, Timothy knelt before Dakota. His voice trembled as he said, "You've given me back more than I thought I'd ever have. family, love, a chance to do this right. Will you marry me? Dakota's eyes brimmed with tears as Darren bounced excitedly beside them, shouting, "Say yes, Dakota! Say yes!" Her laugh broke into a sob as she whispered, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." As Timothy slid the ring onto her finger, Patricia was nothing more than a ghost an ocean away, still wandering Europe in search of herself. She hadn't called, hadn't visited, and Timothy realized he no longer carried the weight of her absence. What mattered was here now, his son, the woman he loved, and the future they were about to build together. The end. Hope you enjoyed this wonderful story by Green Tea Tales. Please support our channel with like, comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.